morning, neighbor. About 11 hours has passed since we made the Levain. It took it a little bit longer because last night it was really cold here in the room, and I baked this morning, and when the room start to warm up because I start baking, then the Levain start to go all the way up. And I would like to show you what a Levain that's ready to be used to make a sourdough starter look like and sourdough loaf look like. Pum. Look at all those bubbles. Look at all those sexy bubbles. It started, it started in here. Remember, I made a mark, and it now already rise all the way here. I would like to show you the difference between a Levain and a sourdough feeding. I don't think you can see it clearly, and I accidentally dropped a spoon in there, so it kind of go down. But yeah, the Levain rise much higher because the water that we use in there is much warmer. It was 98 degrees Fahrenheit. By doing that, we can kind of gauge when, kind of control when we can make a sourdough loaves. That comes with experience. Just keep on trying and get to know your starter. And today I will show you how to make a very simple country sourdough loaves using the ingredients that in normal circumstances we can find easily in any store. I will start with showing you the ingredient list and then the tools that we need to make it, and then I will before I start mixing it, I want to explain to you the steps that's involved in making a simple country sourdough loaves, and I will break the video according to those steps. All right, so ingredients: flour, water, and salt. That's it. Flour, water, and salt. And with the help with sourdough starter, we're gonna turn this into a sourdough loaf such as what you see here on the back. I don't know if you can see it clearly, but that's that. The flour that I'm going to use today is going to be this bread flour. Bread flour is basically a white wheat flour that has a high protein content, and when it's high protein content, it's easier to develop a gluten, and thus it's easier to get the loaf to rise. Once you get a handle of making a simple country sourdough loaf using a strong white flour, then have fun and explore all the other kind of flour that you can use. You can start with a different type of specialty flour like emmer or spelt or kamut, but they have a less predictable characteristic or a more challenging, a more trickier time to maneuver. But hey, if you want to start there, go for it. I started with spelt because I didn't know any better. But after making a bit, I know that this will help you, especially if you started and this is the first loaf that you do. You can make a country sourdough just using this white flour. There's nothing wrong with that. It will still taste tasty, but I always like to add a little bit of something, like this one is a whole wheat. Just 10% or 20% of it's a whole wheat to mix it, to give it a little bit more flavor, a little bit more color. And the water that we're using, again, just like making a Levain, do not use tap water in Norco because it is very harsh, so I use a filtered water. Salt, it is as important, the selection of salt, as how you select your flour. Every single salt has a different flavor, it has a different character. When you have the time, buy a bunch of different type of salt, put it together and do a blind tasting, and you will be amazed by how different they taste. I personally like to use Celtic salt, but this Redmond salt is more common. I see it more often in supermarket, and so we can use that too. It is very tasty as well. And the prepared Levain. The rest is our intention. In terms of tool, what we need is a bowl to mix it, a scraper because it will help us to, clean the bowl and later on divide the dough and such. And we need a scale, just like how we make it. We need a scale, and then at some point we will put that dough that already ready into some type of a thing that we can use to let it rise, and instead of rising or like expanding sideways, it can expand up. Bakers like to use this. This is called a Benetton. This is what we use specifically to what we call is a cold proof. I will explain what that is in a cold proof. But you can easily use any type of bowl. You can even use a colander, that being lined with the cloth or linen. And then for baking it, I recommend you, especially if it's your first loaf, to use a Dutch oven. Why we use Dutch oven? It is because when you're making a sourdough loaf or artisan loaf, you need a steam environment so that the loaf can rise sufficiently before the crust harden. There will be I will talk in more detail on how to bake it when we get to that, but in this cast iron, when it's tight lid like this and the heat reach the dough start to expand and release steam, and that steam got trapped inside the Dutch oven, and that creates the perfect environment for the loaf to rise. And so Dutch oven. If you do not have Dutch oven, I heard that people use those roasting pan that also have a lid, and they have a great result. Alright, let's get right to it. So the process, the way I understand it and the way I always do it, I can break it up into several stages. The first one is called Fermentolyse. Fermentolyse is when we mix the flour, water, and Levain together. And we mix that, we let that mixture sit for about an hour, and then we add salt. We hold the salt for an hour because we want the flour and the water to merge fully first, for the flour to absorb all the water first, because let's see, do you realize when you're cooking, do you ever notice that when you're cooking, before you add in salt, it is easier to char your food? It is because when you put in salt, the salt derived water out of the cell molecule of whatever it is that it touches. And so withholding the salt for a little bit, you can allow time for the flour to fully absorb the water. And I like to mix the ferment together with that, because it is, some people like to mix the flour and water first and then add the ferment, add the Levain, and then add the salt. Or some people like to do it flour and then water, and then they put the Levain and the salt together. Again, there is as many ways to make sourdough as there is sourdough baker. This is the way I like to do it. You mix the flour and water and Levain, you fermentolyze that for 1 hour, and then you add the salt. And after you add the salt, we enter a period that we call a bulk ferment. Bulk ferment is when the dough is fermenting together in the big jar. And during that time, there are several things that we're going to do with it, and I'm going to show you. It's very easy. And after the bulk ferment is concluded, we then divide and pre-shape the dough, let it rest for about an hour, and then we shaped it. That's called benching. Pre-shape it, let it rest for an hour, that's called benching. And then we shaped it, and then we put it in this kind of thing, colander, big bowl, Benetton, and it will enter a period that we call a cold proofing, because we want it to rise slowly. And remember how the wild yeast and bacteria, they work slower when it is a colder environment. We want a cold proof because we want it to happen slowly, the gluten to stretch nicely, and the flavor to develop fully. We do that inside the refrigerator, because in Norco there ain't any place that is cold enough for it to do it slowly like that. Cold proof in the fridge will take about anywhere between 15, and you can stretch it all the way to 36 hours. I've done that before. The flavor is so complex. The rice will be lower because, you know, the gluten has been digested a lot more than if we just put it for 12 hours. But that, again, go back to an experiment that you are going to do, and it is fun to play around with it. Okay, so let's get right to it. I'm going to start doing what I call a fermentolyse. Not just I call, everybody call it fermentolyse. I will show you. Mixing flour, water, and the levain together. Now, I will put the gram measurement in the description, but it is going to be what we call a 75% hydration dough. Now, when you're a baker, you're going to start thinking in percentage and ratio, because it's very easy to remember it when you think about it that way. And if you get the basic, then you can just experiment and what is the word? Create your own formula. This simple country sourdough, the total of flour will be 1,000 grams, and it is a 75 hydration loaf. That means 75% water of that 1,000 grams, so 750 grams of water. The levain that I'm going to use for that amount of flour, which is 1,000 grams, is 170 gram levain. That's all you need. You can increase the amount of levain and it will ferment faster, or you can lower the amount of levain and it will ferment slower. Experiment. I like to go on 170. It works with my lifestyle. And the salt that we're going to add later on, I like to do a 2% salt, so that means a 20 gram. All right. Again, just like making a levain, it is one of the factors that we can control in this environment is the temperature of the water. Optimum dough temperature for fermentation is about 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And thus, in a day like this that's kind of cold, I like to raise the temperature of the water a little bit, because I'm guessing it is probably around 72 degrees. It's even colder actually. It's a 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, definitely. Let's rise the temperature of that water. You can leave it at that. There's no problem. It's just going to ferment very, very slowly. And there's nothing wrong with fermenting slowly. It gives more flavor. Yep. This is something just like what I say about getting to know your starter, you get to know your dough. I raised the temperature of the water into 80 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, here we go. Now, just like when we were making a levain, start with adding water. Now, remember the total is 750 grams of water. I'm going to put 700 grams first and reserve a 50 grams that I'm going to put together with the salt, because it will help the salt to dissolve and disperse. So 700 grams right now. There we go. A little more. Perfect. 170 grams of the levain. You want to add the levain into the water first before you add the flour, because sourdough making is a very tactile thing. Now, oh, the last tool, your hand. You disperse it around. You can use spoon, of course, but I recommend using your hand because then you really get in touch with it. You know, you feel it, you feel the consistency, you feel the temperature. It builds a stronger relationship between you and the dough, and the dough is a very much an alive thing. And just like everything that's alive, the more attention and energy we put into it, the better it will thrive. So you see, the levain is being dispersed in the water. Now is the time to put in the flour. The total of flour that we're going to use is 1,000 grams. I'm going to make that let's do an easy one. Let's do a 90% white and 10% whole wheat. It's a pretty much majority white. So that means 900 grams of strong white flour and 100 grams of whole wheat flour. Then you mix it. Feel it out, swirl it around. You do not need to knead it. There's no kneading in the way I make sourdough. During the bulk ferment, we will do something that is called a coil, and I will show you how. It's very gentle. Mix it around. And I like to use a visible glass container like this, or plastic if you don't have a big enough glass container, because then you will be able to see the rise of the dough. You will, just like the levain, that it creates bubbles, you will see bubbles alongside the glass jar to visibly see the fermentation process that's going on. Make sure that there is no dry flour on the bottom, because that's where it usually likes to settle. And again, this is a 75% hydration. In 1,000 grams of flour, there's 750 grams of water. As you get used to making sourdough, you can increase the hydration level. And if you can maneuver it right, higher hydration leads to a more open and airy type of loaf. And that's it. Clean your hand with your scraper. Like so. It will be very shaggy. In the beginning, it will be very shaggy like this. But as the process goes along, the dough will become more cohesive. Oh man. I have so many accents, I don't even know. Okay. There you go. Just like so. Oh my gonna show you closer how it's looking. It's like that. It's very shaggy by this point, and you will see it transform throughout the process. Okay, now get a linen, cover it, always cover it, because if not it will dry out, especially in Norco, because we are in a very dry climate in here. And let it rest for about 45 minutes to 1 hour, and then we will get back and add the salt into it. See ya.